Hello to all you scintillating lovers out there. Welcome back to another breathlessly exciting, compelling, and engaging episode of Marriage IQ. We love you, and we mean it. And we hope that you're able to feel that love oozing from us and seeping through your phone, laptop, or TV directly to you. Even though we may never met before, we want you to know we love you. On today's episode, we'll be talking about yucky things and what we make of them and what we do with them when it's over. What meaning do we derive from them? Things that make us squirm. In this podcast, we talk about how we transform a stinky marriage into a scintillating one. And it first requires a change in ourselves. We mean that.
We do. But Dr. Hastings, you have no idea what kind of spouse I have, what kind of person I'm married to. It's not right for you to say that I'm the one that needs to change. They are the ones with the issues.
You know, you're right. Consider this. You can be right or you can be married. Which one do you choose? We have shown previously that living your best life requires a spouse. There's pretty convincing data on this. What do you think?
Well, I know you and I visit with a lot of individuals and a lot of couples who may have that mindset that they're not the ones with the issues, but it's their spouse. So I think there are certain patterns that show up over and over again. And so maybe what we can do is take a look at 3 common patterns and share those with our listeners of what that kind of dialogue looks like.
Let's jump right in.
Okay. So first of all, spouse number 1. My spouse cheated on me, and then they lied about it.
Oof.
And then they gaslit me to make me feel like I was going crazy. And I just can't get over it. Even all these years later, every time I think about it, I just lose it. I get so angry about what they did to me, and I get triggered, and I think about it, and I have all these emotional reactions, and I start crying.
Okay.
Okay, so that's number 1.
Pretty traumatic.
It is. Number 2, my spouse is totally checked out of this relationship. I come home from work, they come home from work, and we're like strangers in the night. We barely talk to each other. We barely glance at each other or acknowledge each other's presence. And when they do speak to me, they're angry and they're yelling and they're critical. Really? I think I'd rather be roommates with a random stranger than with my spouse.
Oof. Ouch.
Okay, so number 3. My spouse never supports me and never supports my opinions, especially when it comes to the kids. I want to hold my children responsible for their actions. I want them to learn how to be better, responsible people through experience. But then my spouse goes behind my back and gives our children exactly what they want. I feel undermined. I feel so angry. I have no power in this relationship.
Well, those are 3 really rough examples. But when I hear this, I just want to blurt out, then just get a divorce. You can either be right or you can be married. As I said before, take your pick. But just stop the negative energy and just leave. Is this poor advice? Perhaps. But I don't know what is being served by constantly trudging up old stuff. Are they looking for allies? Do these spouses feel justified in their responses by repeating them over and over again? What and who does this serve? If you have no plans to divorce your spouse, then find a way to divert that negative energy. What do you think, Heidi?
Well, I rarely recommend that anybody get a divorce.
Well, I don't either, but
There are so many things between point A and point Z that can be tried. And yeah, sometimes it doesn't work. In my own life, I got a divorce, but there are so many things that you can do to work on your own self that can either magnify the fact that this marriage isn't going to work, or that can totally change both of you and create a new marriage. I don't even like hearing, I call it the D word. I don't even like it. I know it's necessary sometimes, for sure.
Yeah. So all I'm trying to do is help people think all the way down that row, the row that we're watering.
Is this really what you want?
Yes.
Is that what you're asking?
Is this really
Okay.
what you want? Because if it's not, just save yourself some time and energy and stop talking about it.
Okay.
Otherwise, get divorced.
Okay, you're right. I do not like it when I hear people bringing up and threatening divorce over and over and over.
So that's my only point on this. So what are
Okay.
these stories that we tell ourselves? You know, it's interesting. I was thinking about my own life. I am both a victim and a hero in my own stories in my mind, right?
Yeah.
I heroically go to work every day and bring home a paycheck. I'm a hero. Praise me. And yet, I'm a victim in my own home. Nobody pays attention to me. They don't appreciate me. They don't appreciate all the hard work I do. I'm a victim.
I appreciate you, honey.
I justify, look, this doesn't happen in our home, just so you know. Like, I had a...
But we all go through those times that we feel like we're either a
yes,
victim.
I went through this in the past.
or a hero.
Yes. Yeah. So how do we become victims in the first place? It's a great question.
That is a good question. And I think to better understand that, we need to talk about trauma.
I agree.
A lot of my research has been focused on trauma, so I really like talking about this. First of all, there are big T traumas, very, very traumatic experiences that cause PTSD, and there are little traumas. All of us as humans have trauma in our lives,
Yep.
and they differ from person to person. So we can't indulge judgment on another person's experience, big or small. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
So big T traumas, if you were just out on the street and asked other people, would you call betrayal by a spouse trauma? A lot of people would say yes. If you said, if I was in a war and I watched death and bloodshed, would you consider that to be traumatic, a big T trauma? Most people would say yes. Same with, again, catching a spouse in an affair, a death of a child, partner violence, sexual abuse, natural disasters,
Yeah.
wars, chronic illness, having a spouse with a gambling addiction or drugs or different things like that.
So
Other
you're
hand,
saying most people would agree
that
would
all
be trauma.
those are traumatic.
That's kind of a big
experiences.
T trauma. People would agree on that. Okay.
Right. So then little T traumas then, on the other hand, are experiences we have in life. They could be emotional experiences. They could be non-physical abuse, emotional abuse, or different things. It could be things like growing up in a household where both parents were working and you were home by yourself all the time. It might be something your mother said to you that influenced you negatively and defined part of your life that has a negative impact on some people, and other people, they don't experience it the same way.
These are traumas that if you ask people on the street, they would not necessarily agree that they're
Right.
traumatic.
You would maybe have a few people that would, but not everyone would agree. Some people would say, oh, no, that was my life. And we yelled at each other, we screamed at each other. That's just how it was. But in another home, if someone was yelled at or screamed at, that would be considered a traumatic thing. So little T traumas, like I said, vary wildly between individuals, and it's rooted in several different things. But some of the things are personality traits, genetic makeup, emotional health, mental health, and especially, like I said, some of those childhood experiences. Some people may feel impacted as if a little T trauma is a big T trauma, while others may not think anything of the little T traumas, just the fact that maybe there are several that pile up together.
Do you have an example on that?
I do. In my research, again, I interviewed a lot of women who had experienced betrayal trauma. And two of the women who had the most significant symptoms of PTSD those physical, emotional, psychological, physiological responses had very different experiences. The first one learned that her husband had been with over 250 prostitutes throughout their marriage. She thought that was probably a low number. Her body physically fell apart. Her depression, her anxiety, she ceased really functioning. She couldn't even walk.
Okay.
The other person that had a very close match on those PTSD type symptoms had only seen one pornographic picture on her husband's phone.
Wow.
And yet they both had very similar
Looking at porn
experiences.
once versus 250 prostitutes, same response.
She was innocent and had great values and expected something very different from her husband. And I don't know what her childhood experiences were, but she couldn't think, she couldn't speak, she couldn't even follow a recipe. She would describe going to the grocery store and just being in such a state of confusion
Wow.
that had lasted for a couple of years. So we really can't define other people's
Right. Yeah,
trauma.
that's true. I think a fundamental difference between big T and little t trauma is those experiencing little t traumas as big T traumas have not intentionally set boundaries in their own mind of what they will and won't accept. So they haven't sat down with themselves and set out these boundaries.
That's really interesting. Do you think perhaps also they may have thought about what they will and won't accept, and they've made assumptions about it, but never communicated about it sufficiently with their spouse?
Perhaps. Yes.
So I have an example to share from our family about how we see things differently. So we have this sweet little dog named Molly, and she was 15 years old before she passed away about a year ago. I personally took her on walks almost every day, and she would sit under my desk when I would work. And yet when she passed away in my arms, it didn't hit me like a trauma. It was really sad.
Oh,
It was really,
No.
really sad.
not traumatic.
It still makes me a little bit emotional, but it wasn't traumatic because I felt like that was such a natural path of life.
Okay.
What was your experience
Well,
with that?
I experienced it as a little t trauma. I remembered all the times, the many, many years. I mean, that Molly was with our family growing up. And that's all the kids knew. And so remembering that produced a little t trauma in me. It wasn't something that was life altering. We do have a child who experienced a big T trauma. And
Yeah, it was devastating for her. Devastating. She couldn't go to work for a few days. She still, every time she comes to the house, it's so hard for her.
so
I have
who's
to
right
ask
and
my-
who's wrong
Yeah,
right here?
I have to ask myself, because I didn't experience this as a trauma, am I wrong? Is something wrong with me?
Am I wrong? Should I be spending more emotional capital on our little dog who died?
Or is our daughter wrong? Is she just unable to experience the ups and downs of life?
So we need to make space for all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Here
that's
is my theory. Scott's theory on trauma. My opinion. Big T trauma cannot be processed by emotionally intelligent statements like I feel statements. It is in and of itself not a period of reflection. It is a period of pure, raw, guttural, sudden change in your entire nervous system.
right. I think that's so insightful.
So we can't emotionally intelligently talk ourselves out of big T trauma like we can with little T trauma.
So if you're in shock, or if you are in this state of not understanding really what reality is because things have just been so turned upside down, give yourself some grace during that time.
Right.
And give your partner some grace in that time as well. So Scott, now that we've talked about trauma, I want to go back and start talking about being the victims in our own story.
Yes.
We as humans are all victims at some point or another in our life. And for some, this is truly more vile than it is for others. And I don't want to minimize that at all.
Yes, that's true.
There is such a thing as being victimized by acts that we don't collaborate in at all, especially in cases of abuse. We are not here today to say that such victims are responsible for their traumatic experiences.
Right. Well, and I want to go back to even with these really, really big T traumas, like you talked about, there is a way out. We can talk about working the program.
And I think because so much of my research aligns with this, we're going to weave that narrative from some of my interviews as examples, but really you can find examples in lots of different areas of life. This is just one that I have so many stories and examples on that we're going to keep bringing that up.
So we can take something that happens in marriage and turn it into a lifetime of victimhood, sometimes very easily. And I may feel victimized by something that you said that I felt bad about.
And you're going to keep digging it up
And I keep
digging it up
ruminating and become. So that's an example that I can easily think of. Feeling victimized may come more easily to those who have lived in a sheltered and protected life. Those who tend to feel emotions very deeply with difficulty expressing them.
Okay.
Those who've experienced severe and repeated trauma.
Okay, that makes sense.
Those who fundamentally believe that they are not in control of their own life. It's called an external locus of control. Like, I'm not in control of my life.
These bad things just keep happening to me over and over. Okay.
And those who are unable to see their own role in bad things that happen to them. Believe it or not, narcissists tend to feel victimized. Say what? They are exerting control and superiority by forcing others to pity them, and they lack insight. They'll never ask themselves, well, mainly don't ask themselves, am I the one playing a victim here? There's an example of this, a woman who faked cancer so that she could make money and gain control over the people who showed pity on her. That is, I think, the ultimate example of narcissism playing the role of a victim.
Interesting. So how can we recognize if we are in that victimhood mentality? First of all, do we blame others and avoid personal responsibility? Never look at it from a viewpoint of, did I play a part in this at all? Do I have any part of this that I need to take responsibility for? Do I feel powerless? Like there's nothing that I can do to change my situation. I'm just stuck. Do I feel resentful and bitter? I may be holding grudges and I may be angry at others all the time for how they've treated me, treated you, how you've treated me, how you treated my kids, whatever. Or the constant belief that life is unfair and everybody else has it easier than me.
Yeah.
Another way to know if you are in victim mentality is if you're constantly seeking validation and if you're often seeking sympathy for your struggles. Another one that you see often in marriage, Scott, is triangulation.
Okay.
And that is when we bring in a third person, whether it's a parent, a child, a sibling, a friend, to talk about how terrible our spouse is.
Yeah.
This is simply seeking validation that we're the victim, and it's very destructive. And lastly, if I have perpetual negative thinking, that can be a pretty good sign that I'm in that victim mentality.
So everything is seen through a lens of just negative, dark life.
Right. A victim mentality can really make it hard to move forward or take steps to improve your life. We're stuck in those same patterns without looking for solutions. Just everything is bad all the time.
No solutions.
Right. And I will say in my research, there were some people who were in that crisis period following discovery of betrayal for a year or two, and there were some that were in it for a decade or two.
Okay.
Part of it had to do with shame, but part of it had to do with not using their power, not using their agency, just simply blaming others. So by opening our eyes and looking for possible solutions to how to move out of this state and realizing this isn't where happiness occurs. Do you have some ideas?
I have some solutions. Now that you speak of it, yes. So some solutions, tools for victims to use after experiencing trauma and helping to move through that victimhood. Number 1, grieve the trauma. Sit in it. Acknowledge it. If you don't, you can't move out of it. Don't try to deny it. You are allowed the space to grieve what has been lost or what never will be. This is okay and part of the human experience. Whether it's big T or little t trauma, like I said before, the big T traumas are exempt from any emotionally intelligent strategy. You got to have time to just sit in that for a while. Little t traumas, that time is going to be really short. You can't use I feel statements in the face of what feels like the equivalent of a plane crash. Regarding marriage, research by Gordon et al. 2004 Journal of Marital and Family Therapy suggests that it may take up to 6 months for a betrayed spouse to move away from anger, outbursts, panic, and otherwise emotional reaction before they are able to move into a state of self-reflection. So this is a true victim stage, and you are the victim.
I would disagree with some of that.
Okay.
Again, like I said, I believe that women or betrayed partners, in my research, it was women, but that doesn't mean that's who it always is. They need time to work through their trauma, and no one can put a timeline on how much time that should take. And so when husbands or the betrayer is saying, come on, it's already been 6 months, or come on, it's already been a year, or it's already been 2 years, stop. Don't tell them how much time it should take.
Yeah. However, I think on the role of the betrayer, I think that it is fair to ask, what is a general length of time to move through this so they can start planning? Like it's
but the betrayed partner in all of their planning didn't have truth and didn't have answers.
Yes,
so it's important
you're right.
to just
And
sit
this is a
with
very,
that sometimes.
Yeah, very sensitive.
But I would say showing empathy is going to make a big difference. Being integritous to a fault is going to be very helpful for this. But also from the betrayed person's point of view,
Yes.
if you're just sitting in this for decades, if you're sitting in it for even more than a couple of years without taking action to help yourself heal, you're missing out on some of the very best parts of life that you could be having, because what's on the other side of healing is phenomenal. And when I went through a divorce, if I had just stuck in that victim mentality for year after year, I think it would have either been same song, different verse, or I never would have gotten another relationship again.
Okay. Well, that is very insightful. So number 2 on our solutions for turning from victim to victor. Examine ourselves. Look, we all feel like victims. Traumatic experiences play a role in our lives. Take responsibility right now for your life. Ask yourself, is the story I'm telling myself true or not? Could the possibility exist that I'm just simply wrong? Using I feel statements and internal self-awareness and insight help us learn and grow. We talked about I feel statements as part of emotionally intelligent marriage in episode 39. So back to our previous example on marriage. Research suggests that it takes at least 6 months for most betrayed spouses to just even start stabilizing and moving into this headspace that allows for insight like I feel statements? Does this terrible, horrible story have another perspective to it? Can I consider my spouse's experience in this whole thing? Is there the slightest possibility that I have something to do with what happened? In some studies, it takes up to 2 years. Olson et al. 2002, Journal of Marital and Family Therapy. And again, you may not agree with me. I know you said that you can't put a timeline on it.
Yeah, I think to say, did the spouse have something to do with it? Is maybe the spouse to blame? You can't say that. But what my research did show...
I disagree with you on
It's
that.
okay. What my research did show is once the betrayed spouse could move out of that victim mentality and into a place of healing, taking care of themselves, getting the support and resources they needed, they were able to see weaknesses within themselves and admit those. They were also able to look at their spouse's perspectives, and, almost all of them could look back and see with some sort of compassion that they played a part in it. But that didn't come for those women until they had fully engaged in healing.
But so it does sound like you do, at the end of the day, agree with me that the betrayed spouse, does broach the question, did I have anything to do with some of this?
They often do, but it
takes a long time.
It does. It depends how willing she is to start using her agency to heal.
And I guess I'm talking from the perspective of the betrayer.
Not that you've ever...
No, not that I'm just, as a man, like, I want to know, like, what am I in for? 2 years, a year? Like, I just need to know. And
You don't get to know. Sorry.
yeah, but I think the study, the research, though, that we've done, it does give a general idea of how long it takes the betrayed to move through these stages.
Yeah, that is if they're both accessing the resources they need to be accessing. If there is great integrity, like I said, it's building of intimacy. And by that, I don't mean sexuality. I mean intimacy, and both people working their programs.
I want to prepare for a marathon, not a sprint. So I really need to get mentally prepared to make this
Just
work.
Be prepared to be kind and loving and understanding and empathetic for a really long time.
All right. So we can find this pattern in other circumstances too. I know at work, I had a former employee who I would meet with on a regular basis. And we talked about things to be responsible for if things went wrong. And it was always someone else's fault. And I thought
she reported that
it was all these things that went wrong
that you told her she had done wrong. She would blame it.
It was always someone else's fault.
So there's that blaming. That's
and
how
so
you
I
know.
thought, okay, that you're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Oh yeah, I know that. You know that we all mess up. Oh yes, I understand that. But then when it really came down to it, I mean, she acknowledged it in theory, and I think we all do. But when it really came down to it, she couldn't let it go. It was always someone else's fault. And so blaming others was her approach every time. Fascinating. After all this time trying to talk it through. Anyway.
So let's talk then about the third thing that we can do to come out of that victim mentality and move into a more resilient frame of mind.
Okay, and what's that?
And that is to gain perspective and understanding.
Ooh, yeah.
What's my spouse going through? What's the story they're telling themselves? What has happened in their life that may have impacted this?
Yeah.
What are some things that I might have done in the past that pushed them away from me? What am I doing to harm this relationship? Is there any responsibility that I have in this? And Understanding, I think, is even a deeper level of perspective.
And emotional intelligence.
Yes.
So speaking of that, Heidi, I want to go back to the examples in the beginning of this episode.
The 3 different examples?
Yes.
Okay.
Remember spouse number 1? Mm-hmm. Spouse number 1 said their spouse cheated on them and lied about it. They gaslit them. Remember? They made them go crazy.
Right.
Well, guess what? What if spouse number 1 was married to spouse number 2? Remember spouse number 2?
Yep. The one that was
I come home
just
from
a
work.
roommate syndrome.
They come home from work. We don't even talk. We're not even like roommates. I'd rather have a random roommate. You remember that one?
Yep.
That kind of throws a little perspective in on this whole
2
thing,
different
doesn't it?
perspectives, 2 different ways of understanding. And actually, either spouse number 1 or spouse number 2 can also be married to spouse number 3.
That's right.
It could be any combination of
match.
those, and we see those all the time.
Yeah. So you're talking about gaining insight and just
Right.
seeing the other person's point of view.
What is their perspective, and is there any validity to it? Dr. C. Terry Warner has a whole chapter on how, as humans, we make victims of ourselves in his book, The Bonds That Make Us Free. We both really highly recommend
book.
this book. He shares that understanding self-victimization can soften our accusations of others. It can open us to acceptance of their efforts and enable us to let go of our accusing attitudes and emotions. And with that said, if we're carrying around a lot of heavy emotions on the emotion wheel that we've shared with our listeners, those negative ones,
Yeah.
this is a good time to just unpack that bag and let those go by looking at ourselves and seeing if we're in victim mentality, and instead embrace compassion for our partner, for our spouse. So number 4, focus on what I can control. As we focus on what the things are within our relationship that we can control personally, we're going to shift from blaming our spouse to taking accountability and focusing again on things that we control, such as our own choices, our own reactions, our own behaviors. This, though, is going to really include changing our internal dialogue. Instead of saying, I can't do this because he won't let me, or I have no power. Instead, saying things like, I am powerful and I can do things. I want to give you some examples of some specific ways that we can only look at what we can control. So one of those is setting boundaries. I don't know if some of you are familiar with Mel Robbins. Mel Robbins, she's really big YouTuber, Instagrammer. She's an attorney and is also an author. And she proposes the let them theory that my sister introduced me to. This is really important for avoiding this trauma in the future. It's setting a boundary for yourself, and what other people choose to do is none of my business.
Okay, so you're not setting boundaries for other people.
I'm
just
setting
yourself.
boundaries for myself.
I think that's important to realize the difference.
If my friends are going off to lunch and they don't invite me, let them. Don't be offended about it. Don't be upset about it. If my spouse falls asleep after dinner rather than helping me clean things up, let him. Let them. Stop trying to control what others do by placing boundaries around me, not around them and what they should be doing. Okay, so that's the first one. The second part of what I can control is find resources. If I have big T trauma types of things going on that I feel like a victim, whether it's big T trauma with my spouse or something I've experienced in life that is impacting my marriage, I need to use my power, my agency to find resources. That could be podcasts, it could be books, it could be YouTube videos, it could be therapists, and a lot more as well. But if the resources that I'm looking at keep me in victim mentality, if they paint my role as the victim, rather than helping me rise above victimhood to a place of resilience and transformation, my recommendation is put it down, turn it off, close it. Look for resources that help you become more resilient and even transformed. So number 5, do you want to take that one, Scott?
Let go of resentment. This may take up to 5 years or more for a spouse who is working their program, not relapsing, taking responsibility, and showing great empathy for their spouse. There's a great book I read a few years ago. It's called Letting Go by David Hawkins. In it, he has some really great quotes. One of them is, quote, "Letting go is like the sudden cessation of an inner pressure or the dropping of a weight. It is accompanied by a sudden feeling of relief and lightness. And surrender is a constant process of not resisting or clinging to the moment, but of letting things be as they are. By letting go of your thoughts and feelings that cause you pain, you can become free." It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Star Wars. Obi-Wan Kenobi to Darth Vader. If you kill me now, I will become more powerful than you can ever imagine. And he did, because he learned how to let go.
One thing I want to add that I learned from my research is to use God or a higher power as a resource. The women in my study, some of them left religion, but they didn't leave God. They found that God was very trustworthy. And if you don't believe in God, that's okay. But I encourage you to at least look for a higher power. Understand that this is bigger than you, and you can seek healing. You can find meaning through a power beyond yourself.
So how long is the distance between victim and victor? As long as it takes me to realize that I am in control of my own life,
Exactly.
not anyone else. I am in control of my own life because I have put in the time to figure out who I am. Identity.
Sounds like identity.
One of our 4 cornerstones. I am in control of my own life because I decide who I want to become. I make goals and visions for myself. That's intentionality. That's another of our 4 cornerstones. I am in control of my own life because I am aware of my emotions and how they are perceived by others. I am in control of my own life because I know that living with my sweetheart for a lifetime requires me to see their perspective and how it may or may not be different than mine, and then allow that to exist without judgment as we navigate crisis, trauma, thrills, and joys over a lifetime of meaningful living. That's insight and intimacy.
Our 4 cornerstones come in clutch again. I think the more this becomes a habitual process for us, and we can start identifying those things, start reframing them, start looking at them differently, we can start moving through these faster and faster.
Yes, indeed. I agree. We found that in our own lives.
Yeah.
So goals for this week, individually, ask yourself, am I a victim in my marriage? Is it true? Am I playing a victim role? Don't think about your spouse as a victim or a perpetrator. You've done that already. This is for you and you alone to think about. If you experience profound insight, start right now, today, to wrest that control from everyone or everything in your life. You are in control now of your own life. Savor your scintillating discovery. And with that, have a great week.
Thanks, everybody, for being with us.